She wasn't a beast. She wasn't a specimen. She was Blair, a living, breathing soul with sapphire skin and eyes like orphaned starlight. But to the world, she was just Alien Exhibit 47, something to point at, something to photograph, something that didn't speak, didn't fight, didn't cry loud enough to matter. Until one human paused. Mitchel didn't come to be her savior. He came with tools, not sympathy. A maintenance worker in a glass zoo of cruelty. But fate isn't loud. It whispers. And in that silence, he heard her heart screaming behind the glass. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She looked at him like she remembered him from a life neither of them lived. And that was enough to begin. Enough to risk everything. Enough to burn the line between cage and companion, between alien and beloved. This isn't a love story that bloomed in sunlight. It was born in captivity, behind steel and sorrow. And when it broke free, it didn't walk. It ran, it roared, it shattered. Now press play, and see what happens when one human stops watching and starts seeing. In the heart of Earth's newest marvel, the United Species Conservatory, there stood a cage unlike the others. Clean, quiet, encased in advanced polymer glass, it didn't smell like animals or sound like a jungle. Number it was sterile, clinical, cold. And inside it lived someone precious. She had no number at first, only a whisper of a name left from a planet that no longer answered the stars. Blair, captured in orbit during a failed diplomatic mission, one of a kind. The last of her kind, or so they said. She didn't scream, didn't lash out, didn't resist. And maybe that's why they put her there, because silence is easier to monetize than defiance. Children laughed, adults snapped photos, scientists logged her reactions like they would a new species of insect. Her face didn't register pain the way humans did. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, they betrayed everything. Every blink was a memory. Every gaze a poem of sorrow, written in languages the heart could understand, but words could never translate. She sat there, cross-legged, tracing patterns on the floor with her fingers. Sometimes she would hum, soft, vibrating frequencies only a few nearby felt rather than heard. They called it sonic mourning. Another term added to her file. Then came Mitchel. He wasn't anyone important, not a researcher, not a journalist, just a technician. His job was to service the environmental control units, replace sensors, run diagnostics, and like most, he didn't notice her at first. Until one day, he did. Maybe it was the way she flinched when someone knocked on the glass. Maybe it was the tiny drawing she etched with her fingertip. A sun over 3 figures. A family? A plea? No one cared enough to ask, but Mitchel did. He found himself standing in front of her cage longer than he should, fixing a sensor that didn't need fixing, watching her when she thought no one was looking. Their eyes met, and that single moment changed the rhythm of both their lives. She tilted her head, studying him not with fear, but familiarity, like she saw something behind his eyes, something forgotten, something safe. He lifted his hand, hesitantly. She mirrored him, palm to glass, a barrier between worlds, yet a connection forged in silence. That was the first time Mitchel didn't feel like a visitor, and Blair didn't feel like a captive. Day by day, he kept coming back. Not for duty, but for her, bringing small comforts, a melody played on his datapad, a hologram of stars, a stolen fruit she once stared at longingly in the cafeteria window. Each gesture was a stone thrown into a still pond. Ripples of trust grew. He didn't understand her language, and she didn't speak his, but somehow they communicated, through eyes, through gestures, through something deeper, something that the zoo couldn't trap, something that would soon become their way out. Because love doesn't need words, and cages, no matter how advanced, were never meant to hold souls meant to fly. I never meant to notice her. At first, she was just another job. Another alert blinking red on my wristband, signaling a thermal calibration fault in Exhibit Row 9. I logged in, grabbed my toolkit, and headed down the long, sterilized hallway with its endless panes of reinforced glass. Artificial sunlight shimmered over each exhibit like a lie, hiding the sadness stitched into every corner. Row 9. Enclosure 47. There she was. Unlike the others, howling beasts, posturing warriors, tentacled anomalies, she sat perfectly still, legs tucked beneath her, arms resting on her knees, eyes locked on nothing, not bored, not afraid, just waiting. I remember thinking she looked too human, like someone who'd walked into a masquerade and forgot to wear her mask. Only her skin betrayed her, luminous blue, like dusk captured on flesh. Her hair fell in long waves, midnight spilling over her shoulders. She wore a silver band across her neck, like a collar pretending to be art. Her nameplate read, Blair, genus unknown, origin unverified. I tapped the diagnostic screen, climate stable, lighting optimal, nutrient dispensers full, no errors. Then why the alert? That's when I saw it. She was drawing again. Fingertip pressed gently against the glass. She traced a simple shape, a small circle with 2 dots inside and lines radiating outward. A sun? I stepped closer. Her eyes flicked toward me, slow, deliberate. No panic, no surprise, just a knowing stillness. I crouched, tools forgotten. We stared at each other like 2 strangers stuck in a dream, neither daring to speak in case the silence shattered. For some reason, I raised my hand. She tilted her head and mirrored the gesture, palm to glass, aligning her fingers perfectly with mine. Only the thin, cold barrier separated us. But in that moment, I felt her warmth. Not heat, something else. Recognition. A silent whisper only the soul could hear. You see me. The lights overhead flickered. Just a glitch. I glanced up, but when I looked back, she had dropped her hand and returned to her pose. Silent. Still. I forced myself to move, to finish the scan, pretend I had a reason to linger. But I didn't. I was stalling. Stalling because something inside me had shifted, and I didn't know how to name it. When I left her enclosure, I checked the alert logs again. There had been no fault. None at all. Just a false ping. Or maybe a reason. The next day I came back, not for maintenance. For her. I brought a music chip and left it near the glass. She didn't touch it, but when I returned the following morning, it was gone. In its place was a new drawing, this time of 2 circles overlapping, a ripple of lines between them. Like a visual echo, a shared moment. And so it began. Each day I came, no words, just eyes, just gestures, a conversation without noise. She'd draw, I'd bring her books, visual ones. She'd hum, and I'd hum back with my datapad's soft tunes. She never smiled. But once, when I traced a heart on the fogged-up glass, she copied it, flipped, upside down, imperfect, but hers. My supervisor began to ask questions. Why is Exhibit 47 getting daily inspections? Are you logging those extra hours? I lied. I said there were system irregularities, hidden damage from the last surge. He shrugged. He didn't care about the aliens. To them, they were revenue. Nothing more. But to me, Blair wasn't a statistic. She was a story left unread, a language buried beneath silence. A soul stranded on the wrong planet, waiting for someone to remember she wasn't alone. And somehow, I knew I had to be that someone, even if it meant losing everything else. I started timing my visits with the feeding cycles, so no one would question why I was there. That's when most staff cleared out anyway. The aliens ate under UV supervision, and no one liked being around when the atmosphere chambers fluctuated. Perfect cover for someone like me. someone with something to hide. But Blair never touched the food trays. I'd see the pellets sit there untouched, the water untouched. She would only stare out the glass, not blinking for minutes at a time. Sometimes she'd hum, soft, pulsing tones that vibrated against the walls like a distant memory trying to escape. The other exhibits howled and stomped. Some performed tricks, some snarled behind teeth and wires. But Blair just sat like a question that no one bothered to answer. One afternoon, I brought a hollow disk. It was filled with starfield projections, constellations both earthborn and unknown. I pressed the activator gently near the base of the glass. A spiral galaxy shimmered above the floor. She looked down, startled. Then slowly, she stood. Her fingers reached forward, hovering inches from the swirling light. Then she did something that surprised me. She looked up, into my eyes, and smiled. Not a wide grin, not a forced twitch, just a soft, fleeting moment where her lips curved and her eyes warmed, as if remembering something beautiful from long ago. That was the first time I truly saw her. Not as a specimen, not even as a victim, but as someone. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night I lay awake wondering what she had lost, what she remembered, what haunted her in this place built on captivity and cruelty. I didn't know her species, I didn't know her age, but I knew one thing. She had emotions, and they ran deep. I needed to understand her, so I went deeper. I broke protocol. I hacked into the archive records. Exhibit 47, recovered female life form, unidentified, retrieved from a crashed reconnaissance pod on Mars's outer mining grid, unresponsive upon capture, no translators compatible, currently classified, non-verbal, non-hostile. No family logs, no name listed, just a file tagged containment indefinite. They didn't even try to communicate with her, they just caged her. The next day, I slipped a piece of paper into my sleeve, an old relic, barely used anymore. On it, I'd printed a set of basic shapes: circle, square, triangle, star. Underneath, the words in English. When I arrived, I waited for the guards to rotate. Then I slipped the paper into a crack at the base of the glass. She noticed it instantly. Gently, she picked it up. She studied the page for a long time, and then, with deliberate movements, she pointed at the star and tapped her chest. I blinked. She wasn't just identifying it. She was saying, "This is me." I pointed at myself and said, "Mitchel." She tilted her head, then mimicked, ch. Her voice was like a wind chime caught in fog, fragile, but there. Then she pointed at the paper again and drew a new shape beside the triangle. Something curved, fluid, like a leaf in motion. She tapped her own chest again. "Blair?" I whispered. She nodded, and in that shared space, between glass and courage, we had finally spoken. Not fluently, but honestly. We spent days building that strange vocabulary. She'd draw symbols. I'd bring translations. Every day she became more expressive, not loud, never loud, but alive. Then something changed. One morning I arrived to find her shaking, not violently, but enough to notice. Her eyes were closed tight. Her hands clutched her knees. She rocked back and forth like she was shielding herself from a storm only she could hear. I banged the glass. "Blair! Blair, look at me!" She didn't respond. Suddenly, the console near her chamber flickered, an old system error flashing, "Psyche spike detected." Security. AI would flag this. They'd come in, restrain her, maybe sedate her. I couldn't let that happen. I dropped my tool pouch, tore out a broken console panel from the adjacent enclosure, and forced a soft alarm to trigger nearby. As expected, the AI rerouted its alert to Zone 7 instead. I bought her time. After the red lights dimmed, I knelt down, placed my hand on the glass, and waited. Minutes passed. Then her eyes slowly opened. She crawled to the glass, lifted her hand again, and placed it against mine. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. Because some moments don't need words. Some moments are loud even in silence. The glass became our language. Not just a barrier, but a canvas. Every day Blair would draw, not random sketches, stories. Her fingertips moved like they were tracing memories burned into her skin. Moons orbiting stars, trees with glowing roots. A small creature curled beside her, outlined again and again. I didn't know what it was, until one morning she held up a tiny shape made from her leftover meal powder. It was a kitten, or at least her version of one. Her memories weren't about war or destruction or science. They were about love, loss, home. I started bringing her images from old Earth history, forests, animals, cities, oceans. She reacted most to the ones with open skies. Whenever I showed her a photo of clouds, her eyes shimmered. It was like she missed the color blue. Not the shade of her skin, but the kind only the sky carries after a storm. One evening, during a power cool-down, I found her scratching a shape onto the floor with a piece of wire she'd hidden beneath the feeding station. It was jagged, sharp, not like her usual delicate drawings. It was a cage, and next to it, an open gate. She looked at me with eyes that asked one question. "Can you open it?" My breath caught. I wasn't sure if she meant metaphorically or literally, but something had shifted. She wasn't just remembering anymore. She was planning. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, imagining her voice. Not the ghost whispers she'd murmured, but a full sentence. What would she say if she could speak freely? Would she ask for help? Would she ask why we kept her locked like a prize? Would she ask if I was just another human pretending to care? The next day, I arrived early. Earlier than ever. The guards hadn't rotated yet. A few technicians shuffled through with their eyes on their tablets. No one noticed me slip something beneath my coat. A small, palm-sized chip containing a portable translator AI. Outdated, unauthorized, but functional. I approached the glass. She was awake, waiting. I crouched down, slid the device toward the crack in the bottom seal. It glowed briefly, scanning frequencies. Her eyes widened. She touched it softly. I activated the external speaker. A pause, then a sound, a word. Tree, ch. It tried to say my name again. Mitchel. Then her voice came through, filtered and stuttering. Sky, soft, sleep, open. Tears welled in my eyes. She was trying. So I spoke back. I want to help you. The device translated. She blinked, touched her chest, then spoke again. Not help. Fly. The word hit me like lightning. She didn't just want out. She wanted freedom. And I knew right then this wasn't a slow burn connection anymore. It wasn't just about shared glances and sketches. This was love, grown in captivity, daring to crack the walls around it. But love alone wouldn't be enough to break her free. That afternoon, I reviewed every floor plan of the conservatory I could access. The emergency override systems, ventilation paths, blind spots in the security grid. It was all mapped into my wrist console through months of maintenance logs. And tucked away in the oldest part of the archive, buried beneath decades of bureaucracy, I found something incredible. An unsealed external hatchway. Abandoned during renovations. Still powered. Still connected. It wasn't wide. But Blair didn't need wide. She needed possible. That night, under the excuse of system checks, I stood by her glass. I placed my hand there again. But this time I didn't lift it after a second. I whispered, I found a way. She didn't respond, just stared at me, deeply, silently. Then she pressed her palm against mine, her longest touch yet. Then she stepped back, and with that same wire she drew one more symbol on the floor, a curved path leading out from her enclosure, to stars. Then she looked at me and nodded once, and in her eyes I didn't see fear anymore. I saw hope. The escape had to be perfect. One wrong move, and she'd be drugged, locked down, or worse, transferred. There were rumors of off-world buyers watching the conservatory auctions. Blair wasn't just an alien girl to them. She was a rare commodity, a jewel in a cage they believed belonged in a vault. But to me, she was no jewel, she was a soul. I spent the next 2 days rewiring the emergency sprinkler grid to delay lockdown triggers. Most didn't even remember those ancient pipes existed. The whole building ran on atmospheric control now, but I knew the system would still respond to heat. And I had a plan. On the third night, the skies turned restless. Rain kissed the glass dome above the conservatory, and thunder rolled like distant drums calling the brave to act. I approached her cell in silence. Blair stood. She knew. I tapped my wristband. A silent countdown began. 3 minutes. Behind me, the camera blind zone pulsed, the one I'd programmed to blink out during sprinkler activation. I opened the hidden control panel beneath the walkway and activated the override. A small hiss escaped from the piping system above. Water began to mist through the air, soft as fog. The alarms didn't trigger, just like I'd hoped. The system believed it was a false fire drill. Now I placed my palm against the glass one final time. Blair stepped forward. No hesitation. Her hand touched mine. And then I hit the second switch. With a hiss and grind, the magnetic seals of her enclosure deactivated. The front wall slid open just enough for a figure her size to slip through. She stared at the exit for a heartbeat. Then, she moved. Graceful, swift, silent. She reached me, and for the first time I felt her hand in mine. No glass, no barrier, just warmth. I looked into her eyes. "We go now." She nodded. We sprinted through the service tunnel I'd mapped 2 nights earlier. Pipes overhead hissed. Lights flickered. The backup system strained under the diversion. The corridor twisted past exhibit chambers, down beneath the main zoo floors. Here, dust replaced surveillance. Even the floor tiles felt forgotten. Behind us, faint voices echoed. Someone had noticed, probably a thermal discrepancy. We didn't have long. We turned a final corner, and there it was, the old hatch, covered in corrosion, barely functional, but still connected to the outer port ducts. I pulled the panel open and slammed the override key into place. The door creaked, struggled, then gasped open like a coffin finally unlatching. Blair stared out. A soft night breeze kissed her face. Real air, not recycled, not conditioned. Earth's breath. Her eyes shimmered with awe. Then the sound of boots, metal-on-metal footsteps, rushed behind us. "They're here!" I shouted. She looked at me, panic rising. I reached down, helped her into the crawl tube. The passage sloped up toward the forest line surrounding the dome's edge. "Go! Don't stop!" She crawled, quick and agile. I followed. Halfway through, a voice crackled in my earpiece. "Unauthorized exit detected. Security en route." No time. We reached the final panel, an emergency exit shielded by brush and soil. I shoved it open with both hands. Dirt cascaded in, roots cracked, a moonlit clearing opened beyond it. She crawled through and tumbled into grass, her hands clenching earth for the first time. I emerged right after. For one moment we stood there, free, breathless, soaked in rain. But freedom is never quiet. Spotlights suddenly tore across the trees. Drones buzzed overhead. "They tracked the motion path!" I shouted. Blair turned toward me, not with fear, but with fire. She grabbed my hand. We ran, through trees, under branches, across shallow water. The drones chased, scanning, illuminating. But they didn't know these paths. I did. I'd played in these woods as a boy, before the world built glass cages and called them progress. We reached a cave, half collapsed from a landslide years ago. Just wide enough for 2, hidden, forgotten. We crawled inside and pressed against the rock. Heartbeats pounded. Lights flashed beyond the leaves. Then, silence. The drones moved on. I turned to her. Rain clung to her skin like melted sapphires. Her chest rose and fell with sharp, shaking breaths. Her fingers trembled against mine. And then she did something I wasn't ready for. She leaned in and rested her forehead gently against mine. No words, just that. Connection, recognition, gratitude, and something dangerously close to love. I closed my eyes, because that night, for the first time, neither of us was behind glass, and that meant anything was possible. The cave gave us one night. Just one. We huddled against the stone wall, our clothes damp, breath misting in the cold. Outside, drones combed the tree lines, casting wide beams of artificial light that never quite reached where we were hidden. Blair sat beside me, knees to chest, her arms wrapped around herself. Not from fear, but from the weight of something older than any cage. She hadn't spoken since we ran, but she hadn't let go of my hand either. Dawn broke soft and pale. The forest, wet from the storm, smelled like rebirth. She crawled to the edge of the cave, looked up through the canopy, and closed her eyes. The light warmed her skin, and for the first time I heard her laugh, a whisper, really, but real. I sat beside her, watching as she lifted her hand toward the sky, like she was trying to touch something she used to know. Her people, her past, the stars. I knew what she was feeling. We both did. Freedom tastes sweet, but it burns in the throat when you realize you're still hunted. We had to move. I led us down a forgotten ranger trail toward a sector where signal towers hadn't reached yet. There, buried beneath moss and rust, was what I'd only heard whispered in tech forums and old decommission reports. The crash ship, a pod, long abandoned, half sunken into the earth, covered in vines. Alien origin, still humming faintly. We found it. Blair's eyes widened. She approached it slowly, reverently, as if meeting an old friend after decades. Her hands glided over its hull. Symbols on the side lit up as her skin touched them, recognizing her, accepting her. It responded to her. With a low rumble, a hatch opened. Inside, stasis systems still intact, nav console flickering weakly, one seat powered. This was her ticket home, or anywhere beyond this planet. She stepped inside. I stayed at the threshold, breath shallow, heart heavy. She turned back, looked at me, then down, then back again. I smiled, but it wasn't easy. You were never meant to stay here. Her expression shifted, something between resistance and sorrow. She opened her mouth to speak. The translator whispered through static. You are not cage. You are spark. My chest cracked open. I laughed. I shouldn't have, but I did, because she always had a way of saying the most important things in the simplest ways. She stepped out of the ship, stood inches from me, and in the quiet between us, she whispered something unfiltered by any device, spoken in her native tongue. I didn't understand the words, but I understood her. She placed her forehead to mine like she did in the cave and said one last word. Mitchel. Clear, crisp, final. She turned, climbed inside the pod again, and with one touch, sealed the hatch. I stood there unmoving, watching as the engines began to glow. The vines burned away. The earth shook slightly. Birds scattered into the skies. And then she rose, not with violence, not with speed, but gently, like a dream letting go of a tired sleeper, up through the trees, beyond the clouds, until she was gone. I stood there long after, alone, but not broken. Because when she left, she didn't just escape a cage, she gave me something back, something I hadn't felt in years, purpose, a reason to feel again, to fight again, to see the ones no one sees. They tried to display her like an animal, but she wasn't something to look at. She was someone to believe in, and now I believe. In her, in us, in what happens when two people from different stars meet in silence and choose to run instead of kneel.